WNYC Studios is supported by Car Care To Go. We all know the hassle of getting an oil change or car repair. Car Care To Go saves you time and stress. They pick up your car, repair it, and bring it back to you all with the click of a button. Schedule now at carcaretogo.com and use code WELCOME25 for $25 off any service. That's carcaretogo.com and use code WELCOME25 for $25 off any service.
Listener supported. WNYC Studios.
You're listening to The Brian Lehrer Show on WNYC. I'm Bridget Bergen, filling in for Brian today. And now we turn to pandemic parenthood. What an appropriate morning to do that as we spring forward, something that comes with all its own complications for parents and children. If becoming a new parent wasn't hard enough, the isolation and uncertainty experienced during this past year certainly hasn't helped. Joining me now to talk about her experience giving birth and transitioning into motherhood during the pandemic is Sophie Gilbert, staff writer at The Atlantic. Her latest article is titled, "Becoming a Parent During the Pandemic Was the Hardest Thing I've Ever Done." Welcome to WNYC, Sophie, and congratulations on your twins.
Hi, Bridget. Thank you so much, and thank you for having me.
And listeners, we're going to open up the phones right away to those of you who became new parents during this past year. What was the hardest part of transitioning into parenthood during this time? And did anything help? We'll take your stories and maybe your advice for other new parents if you got it. Tweet at Brian Lehrer or give us a call now at 646-435-7280. That's 646-435-7280. Again, we want to hear from you, new parents, people who became parents during this pandemic. And Sophie, to you, welcome. And, in your article you wrote, one of the horrific aspects of viruses is that they punish intimacy. What did you mean there, especially in the context of giving birth?
I think in the context of giving birth, it's that you expect, I think when you're pregnant, when you're thinking about having children, you expect that it will be a time when you're surrounded by community, when you're surrounded by family and friends, and you get to share the babies, these lovely, lovely, sweet newborn babies with people, and you in turn get to draw on help and support, emotional support, physical support, food, everything. And giving birth in a pandemic for me had none of that. My family are all in England. My husband's family, we live in New York, so my husband's family were obviously afraid of COVID. When I gave birth in the hospital, the nurses and doctors there basically told us not to see anyone before the babies had had their 2-month shots. And so we went into the first 2 months of the babies' lives alone. We had no one to help us. Basically, I think I mentioned it in the article, but we had, we had our doorman who we saw, and the baby's pediatrician who we saw a lot. She was amazing, but no one else. It was just us and the babies in the apartment.
Yeah, it was so powerful to read about the experience of, being pregnant at the start of the pandemic in March, but then essentially not having anyone really see you pregnant besides your husband, giving birth in July and having your family abroad, and really not having the support system. You described it like a wound, but I'm wondering in terms of the mental health experts that you spoke to, many of whom told you that the rates of postpartum depression have gone up a lot since the pandemic began. What are some of those experts seeing on the ground?
I think, first of all, they, anecdotally, a lot of them told me that they're seeing increased rates of depression and anxiety. Obviously, anxiety is something that's very common in parents, in mothers after giving birth, and it's exacerbated, if there's an invisible pandemic. Certainly it was for me. I was afraid to leave the house. I was afraid to go in stores. All these feelings that you have, that you're sort of primed to have biologically, you have tenfold because your hormones are running wild. One psychotherapist told me that after you give birth, your fight or flight system is really amped up to the maximum. You're supposed to be primed to sense danger, obviously, and so that in a pandemic is not ideal. It's all these sort of things that happen normally. It just made worse. But the interesting thing for me was I've received so many emails after this story went up, and a lot of women told me that, and fathers too, I should say, because this does affect fathers too, told me that they had very similar experiences, even not in pandemic times. And that the one I keep thinking about is a woman sent me an email yesterday, and she said I had intrusive thoughts after my pregnancy. I kept having thoughts over and over and over again of awful things happening to the baby, specifically of them falling off the balcony. And it's a common phenomenon. But I'd never heard of it. I'd never thought, until my therapist told me what it was. I had no idea. I thought I was, losing my mind. And a woman wrote me yesterday and said she'd had the same thing, and she'd never told anyone because she had such shame. And I think this is the thing that we really need to do a better job in talking about these things, because unless you see a therapist, you really don't know that what you're feeling and what you're thinking is normal. If that makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah. In reading your story, there was so much about it that felt both universal to the experience of new parenthood, and yet so much more exacerbated by the time and the moment and all of the extremes that we are living with. I want to invite one of our callers into this conversation. Becca from Williamsburg. Becca, thank you so much for calling WNYC. What's your experience been like? Oh, I hear a baby in the background.
Oh, yes. Hi. Well, I've just read your article the other day, actually, and I do identify with so many of the points, like having hyper anxiety about, thinking these random horrible things will happen to your baby that you just imagine. And also your point about being pregnant and then having a baby and not having anyone to share it with. Especially once the baby's born, it's you want to show it off, you want people to meet your baby, and you can't. But I would say one big silver lining for our family, my husband and I are both chefs, so we lost our jobs a month before our due date. And so we spent the first 4 months of our baby's life at home. And it was just so special for us because that really would have never happened otherwise.
Absolutely. The silver lining on pandemic parenthood. Have you heard similar types of stories to that, Sophie?
I have. Becca, I'm so, thank you for sharing your story. I'm so sorry for everything that's happened to you. I have. There is some conflict in this, because obviously I felt this too. I mean, you wish things were different, but at the same time, when my husband went back to work after his first 4 weeks of parental leave, he was still in the apartment with me. So I wasn't alone with twins from, 8 till 5 every day, which I really don't know how I would have gotten through that. So in the sense that, yes, we have been able to really, and I think other parents have shared this too, that when you do have a newborn, you do want to spend those first weeks at home, really kind of just being a family and not feeling pressure to go anywhere or see anyone or do anything. And so in that sense, that's very much present for new parents now. But the lack of support, I think, is just the thing that's been hardest for me in so many ways.
Let's go to Sydney in Queens. Sydney, welcome to WNYC.
Hello. You might hear a little bit of Juniper in the background too.
Hello, Juniper.
Yeah. I'm really glad you're doing this segment. I actually read this article just over the weekend, and it really resonated with, I think, a lot of what me and my husband experienced. I guess I delivered in December, wore a face mask, for virtually the entire labor and delivery, which was exciting. But, would do it again if asked, no problem.
Absolutely.
I guess what you've been speaking about, pregnancy is already such a medical, crisis, even under the best of circumstances. So to have the pandemic raging throughout it, just heightens everything.
Sydney, did you
grateful
feel...
things are moving in the right direction. Yeah.
Did you feel, and we want to congratulate Juniper on making her radio debut this morning.
Oh, yes.
Did you feel, because of, you're talking December 2020 was when your baby was born. At that point, we were starting to talk about vaccines. We were starting to kind of look. Is that something that has helped you in, the months since, because you knew we were sort of moving in the right direction?
That is an interesting point. Yeah, because I think, because the early part of my pregnancy was during sort of overlapped with some of the scarier months, particularly in New York City. And but by the end of the year, I felt like I had different countdown clocks. The countdown to the election, the countdown to inauguration, and the countdown to my due date, kind of all kind of rage. And essentially also a countdown to the vaccine and when it would be widely available. That's sort of the new countdown. And we finally have been able to kind of start to see and coordinate with grandparents now that they've been, either have been or are in the process of getting vaccinated and that kind of thing. So there is some. Also, the weather has made a huge change, I think. Now that it's spring again, getting able to get out there. And
Sydney,
Juniper is very opinionated too. I wish I could get her too.
We can't wait to have her back when we can understand more of what she's saying. Thank you both for calling this morning. We really appreciate it. I want to go back to you, Sophie, for one moment about this idea of matrescence. It sounds like adolescence. You wrote about it, and I wonder if you can tell our listeners a little bit about what it means and how the pandemic specifically is changing your experience and likely the experiences of many of these parents that we're talking to about it.
Yeah, so I had never heard this term before I started thinking about writing this story, and then I came across it, and it seemed to perfectly sum up a lot of the things that I'd felt. So matrescence is a word that was coined in the 1970s by an anthropologist, and it describes the process in which you go from being someone without children to someone with children, going from a non-parent to a parent. And it mimics deliberately in its structure the word adolescence, because the same kinds of things apply. There are hormonal changes, there are physical changes, biological changes, there are emotional changes, and there are changes in identity too. Like, you go from being a person who has always been one way in the world and built your identity around certain things to suddenly reforming your identity as being a parent. And so it's this really fascinating, quite stark change. I wasn't prepared for it myself. And it's not very well studied, and as I said, I'd never heard of it. But the thing that I found complicating in the pandemic, that I still feel now actually, is that I have my twins are 8 months old. They were 8 months old this weekend. But so few people have ever, thank you, so few people have ever met them or spent meaningful time with me and them together, that it's almost hard to build your identity as a parent if no one ever sees you doing it. And so in a way, I feel like I've had these two lives. I had my life before I became a parent that was full of people and places and things and work and, all these things that I built my identity around. And then I have had my life in this apartment for the last 8 months with my husband and the twins and really no one else. And so it sort of led me to wonder about this question, like, how does it shape your identity, or how do you form an identity when you're sort of doing it in a vacuum, when no one sees you doing this thing that has become really like the only thing you do at the moment?
Absolutely.
And So I'm interested. I'm curious if other people have had this experience too, with the change in how they think about themselves and see themselves. Certainly being stuck at home, but also just having babies in general. Yeah.
Well, our fathers have called into the show as well. We're going to take a call from Adam in the Bronx. Adam, welcome to WNYC. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I became a father for the first time 14 weeks ago. My son was born a month early, and we were completely unprepared. However,
even if you thought you were prepared, you wouldn't have been prepared.
Yeah. That's what I learned. but one of the most stressful things about this experience has been my wife's family and my family handling this in two completely different ways. With one family being a little more lax with rules, and another family being or using an abundance of caution, and kind of trying to find that balance of like including them in our lives, but in a way that's comfortable for us. And yeah, you know, this was my mom's first grandchild, and she's been waiting for a long time.
Oh.
And yeah, and it was really hard, you know, trying to keep a distance.
Yeah, I mean, the grandparents are as much a part of so many of these family conversations. We want to acknowledge how hard it's been for so many grandparents out there who are waiting to meet their new grandchildren. Adam, thank you so much for sharing your experience with us. Let's go to one more caller. I think we have time for Sophia in Brooklyn. Sophia, welcome to WNYC.
Hi, nice to be on air.
And what was your experience like?
I gave birth at the initial peak of the pandemic in April of 2020, when they had changed a lot of the regulations regarding partner and labor support, and so I wasn't able to have my partner with me during recovery from my C-section, and so at a time when you're supposed to be celebrating one of the most joyous moments of your life, not only do you have the physical and emotional support that you would need, but also the city as a whole is grieving, and so to have your own personal joy while there's refrigerated trucks outside of the hospital and this mass mourning is a really strange experience, and I think sets a tone that can be hard to overcome.
Yeah. Well, Sophia, I'm so sorry that I cannot imagine a situation where you have to go through so much of that alone. But hopefully, now that you are home, there's some comfort in that.
Yes, for sure. Yeah, things
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for calling and sharing that perspective. And Sophie, thank you for your story. It clearly has resonated with a lot of our callers, a lot of our audience. I know I've seen it shared a lot on social media. I'm sure you're hearing from a lot of parents. And, we wish you the best with your twins. We're going to have to leave it there for today. My guest has been Sophie Gilbert, staff writer at The Atlantic. Her latest article is titled, "Becoming a Parent During the Pandemic Was the Hardest Thing I've Ever Done." Thanks so much for coming on today.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you everyone for calling.
I'm Bridget Bergen, WNYC's senior political correspondent. I've been filling in for Brian, who is off today. Thanks so much for listening.